So I'm keeping it real mellow with Mackish on today's show. I want to talk about admitting mistakes on today's show. That's today's topic. I'm talking about people admitting their mistakes, because that's the thing. A lot of people don't like to admit when they've done something wrong or when they are doing something wrong. And I've talked about making mistakes before. I've talked about having mistakes in your game, but I want to build on that. I want to take it to another level, because I see a lot of people making mistakes, and not admitting your mistakes is one of the greatest hindrances to your success. It's very difficult to be successful at anything when you don't admit that you're doing something the wrong way, or that you're making or have made mistakes. Saying to yourself, hey, I messed up. That's a very important part of the game. To say, I messed up. That's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to do. People will wallow in failure forever instead of saying, hey, I fucked up. It's natural to fail at certain things. It's natural to make mistakes. But you have to acknowledge when you make mistakes, and you have to acknowledge when you failed. I'm the confidence guy. I love talking about being confident and going for yours and being persistent. But sometimes we do things and we fail at it. And I'm telling you this from experience. I've tried a lot of things and I failed at them. I tried to become a record producer. I failed at that. I didn't get it popping off. I got a little something popping off here and there, but I didn't really get it popping off being a record producer back in the day. I tried to open up a rental car place back in the day. That kind of failed. So I've done things and they failed. I've learned over the years to admit failure and say, okay, let me try another path. And again, I'm not trying to say that I'm holier than thou, because I've made big mistakes. And that's really what the game is about. And what my show is about is me talking about mistakes that I've made so other people won't make those mistakes. The thing is, we a lot of times get advice from people who have the infallible mentality or the infallible persona, and they don't like to admit that they have done things wrong. They try to act like they can do no wrong, and we get advice from people like that, and then we fail. And a lot of times this comes from our parents. Our parents feel like they have to not show weakness by showing themselves as making mistakes. And not just parents, from other people. A lot of us feel like we'll be looked upon as being weak if we admit to making mistakes. But the thing is, we have to understand when we done tried to do something that just didn't pop off. We have to say to ourselves, hey man, this just didn't work. Let me try something else. That's why we see old niggas trying to be rappers. Y'all see that? We have a lot of that. We have these old niggas in the hood walking around with their damn demo. Even when I do my lectures and there's somebody's pops handing me a DVD or a CD of him rhyming. And cats stepping to me like, hey man, I got that hot fire. I'm like, dude, you got grandkids. And I'm not trying to shit on nobody's dream, but at a certain age, it's just not a practical thing for it to pop off for you. So you have to understand when you taking a wrong path or when something is just not for you. And I'm not saying shit on your dream. There's nothing wrong with having dreams, and there's nothing wrong with being persistent about your dreams, because there's going to be obstacles. Everything isn't going to be easy. There's going to be obstacles when you try to pursue certain things that you like. But again, it has to be practical at a certain point. If you's an ugly ass broad, you're just not going to be America's Next Top Model. I don't give a damn how many letters you send Tyra Banks, how many auditions you go on. Some of you just don't have the face for it. Some of you dudes out here, you ain't got the body to be an athlete. Nigga, you're 5'2" and one of your legs is shorter than the other, and you're trying to try out for the Lakers. It might not pop off for you. So you have to understand your path. You have to know when you're doing the right thing, and you have to know when it's time to charge something to the game. And this just transcends relationships. This goes for everything. This goes into every aspect of life, including relationships, but not exclusive to relationships. But like I said, man, a lot of people, they're embarrassed to admit that they've made mistakes. And me, I've learned to quickly admit that I've made mistakes, and this was a learned process. Because any good leader, and like I said before, any good leader, anybody who's trying to be successful, you have to acknowledge what you've done wrong. Because it's inevitable that we are going to make a few missteps on our paths in life. So we have to understand when we make those missteps and not be embarrassed by them. The thing is, man, there's a power and a freedom in saying, I messed up. People think it's a weakness, but it's a power. It's a strength in that. People think, I can't let these people see that I messed up. I got to keep up my game face. You can't have that mentality all the time. Especially if you're working with somebody, if it's a team effort. Now, you don't want your enemies to know that you're making mistakes. You understand? There has to be a balance. You don't want your enemies to see your mistakes, but your allies, you need to let them know what your limitations are and what are some of the things you're messing up in, so they can trust you, because people know when you're making mistakes. You're not fooling nobody. That's the thing. We feel like if we mess up in the game and we keep covering it up, people won't notice. But people know when you're making mistakes in the game. They know when you're messing up. They're just waiting on you to say something. They're waiting on you to acknowledge it. And a lot of times people won't say nothing to you because they don't want to embarrass you. And if they say something to you, you will get on the defensive. You've seen that. You've seen people make mistakes, do the wrong thing, and then when you try to correct them, they get defensive about it. So you just say, okay, I'm going to just let you do you. But people know when you're messing up in the game, whether you believe it or not, for the most part. So you're not really fooling anybody. So it's best to acknowledge what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, and if you've made missteps, admit that. It gives you a freedom, because it's very entrapping to sit up and try to live a lie and cover up the little bullshit that you've done wrong. That's a very stifling existence to have. And people will start doing things or keep doing things that's just not working for them, because they're too embarrassed to say, okay, damn, I made some missteps back in the day. People will take the wrong path and stay on that path out of stubbornness. Because if they veer off that path, that's like admitting mistakes. That's like admitting that they were wrong. So they'll stay on the wrong path just to save face. And you're only hurting yourself. By not admitting your mistakes, you're not hurting nobody but yourself. And this is a learned process. Again, I've gone through this. I've made mistakes in the game. When I look back in hindsight, I'm like, oh, damn, I was messing up in the game heavy. So I'm telling you from experience. When my first book came out, The Art of Mackin', when it first came out, it was the hottest book on the streets. Back in 2000, the hottest book on the streets was The Art of Mackin'. The book was all over the place. So, I'm getting a little cocky because I had a hot book out. I'm like, the author, hot ass book on the street. Everybody's reading it. So a lot of the major publishers started contacting me to give me book deals. I had a small book deal with a small publisher out of Chicago that put out The Art of Mackin', but all the major publishers started calling. And around 2002, I signed with Simon & Schuster to do Player Be Played. Now, at this time, I'm still coming out of that street mentality. I still had that street mentality. Real rough around the edges. I could still spit that hot fire, but I still had the street shit. And I wasn't used to dealing with the corporate world. And also, my mentality was different then, because I have the hot book out now and all these major publishers are trying to get at me. Now I'm mad arrogant. I'm extremely arrogant, and I'm arrogant at my own peril, because these publishers, and with Simon & Schuster in particular, because I signed with a couple of different publishers, but with Simon & Schuster, they were trying to help me out. They wanted to do business. We signed, they gave me a whole lot of money for Player Be Played, and they wanted to make the relationship work. But at the time, I had this holier than thou attitude. I was a real boneheaded cat at the time. I was a relatively young guy. I'm still going out to the clubs every other night. So, I had that mentality. And again, I still had that street mentality to a certain degree. So I became somewhat difficult to work with. I can look back and say that. I have no problem admitting that now. Back then, I wouldn't dare admit that. It was everybody else's fault. I'm like, God damn it, y'all ain't promoting my shit. Y'all ain't doing this. But I was an asshole back then. I was fucking up in the game. Simon & Schuster, they would set up book signings and I wouldn't show up because they wouldn't get me a certain radio spot that I wanted. And plus, these cats, they gave me a lot of money, so I'm all over the place. I was supposed to be in one city, and I'm in Hawaii, and I'm flying over to Italy. I'm just throwing my money away. I'm just being a real douchebag at the time. And I'm throwing salt in my own game by doing this. At the time, I'm thinking I'm being some rebellious dude. I'm thinking I'm doing something fly. I'm thinking I'm doing something slick, but I'm damn near about to fuck up my business relationships I'm like on some Rick James shit. You know what I'm saying? I'm like on that rock star, I'm the hot nigga, because it was an arrogance. And not only that, because I had to look deeper into it, I think there was a lot of anger behind the arrogance, because arrogance is really when you're trying to cover up something. Confidence is one thing, and I even talked about this in one of my own books. I talked about this in The Art of Mac, and the difference between confidence and arrogance. Arrogance is when you're over the top, you're trying to cover up something, and I was trying to cover up something. I was very angry, low-key, at the corporate world, because years before, when I moved to LA, I was very broke, I was homeless, and I would try to get square jobs, and nobody would hire me. For whatever reason, maybe because I was a very young guy. I was like a teenager when I moved to LA, and I didn't have any experience. So it could have been a number of reasons. So when I tried to get into the square world, work a square job, the corporate or square world wouldn't put me on. So that's how I started rolling with the hustlers and the street dudes. I got this mentality where, okay, damn you squares. That was very hurtful to be in a situation like that. So when I got with those hustlers, the hustlers amplified that, because that was their whole mantra. Us hustlers against the world. It's us against the squares. We'll show the square world that we can get ours without them. That's the whole mentality of the underground hustling world. So that was a lot of anger that I had at the corporate world. So when I'm doing my thing on the streets and then I end up getting a hot book that just happens to be a bestseller, now all these corporate people are trying to get at me. the same corporate people in my mind that shunned me years before, which not really, because I should not have personalized what happened years before, because we take too many things personally. I'm going to do a show about that, about not taking certain things personally. We have this anger. We think that people are proactively doing stuff to us, and they're not really doing anything to us, but we personalize it and we become bitter behind it. And that happened to me. I was very angry at the corporate world. So when they stepped to me like, hey, can we get down with you? I gave their asses hell. I'm like, oh, you want to get down now? Well, fuck you. Give me your money. That's right. Give me all that money. I ain't doing, I was a fucking douchebag. And what made me wake up, it was one incident. They were booking a lecture for me. Simon & Schuster set up a lecture. I did a women's expo lecture, and this was in Raleigh, North Carolina. Huge crowd. It was like 15,000 people there. And the people at Simon & Schuster, they wanted me to sell books there. They were like, well, Tariq, when you go there, we want you to sell Play Be Played there. And at the time, I hadn't done any lectures at the time. I'd done private teaching, but I've never done any big lectures, so I didn't know how it worked. I know how to get in front of a crowd of people and just spit game and just be myself, but I didn't know how the whole process worked. So they wanted me to sell books, and I'm taking that as an insult. Like, this is how arrogant and fucked up my mentality was back then. They were like, I'm like, you want me to sell books? I ain't selling no books. That's beneath me. I'm King Flex, bitch. I don't sell books. I spit game and get bitches. I'm on that shit. They're like, okay, nigga, whatever. So I go do this lecture. After I do the lecture, I get a line of people just, mobbing me, wanting to buy books. People just got their money in hand, ready to buy my books after I do a lecture, and I ain't got shit to sell them. And I'm looking at myself, seeing a jackass in the mirror. You know those cartoons where they look at themselves in the mirror and they see a big donkey? That's what I saw, a big fucking donkey in the mirror. I'm like, I'm ignorant as hell. So that right there made me snap up out of that dumb shit, to get out of the arrogant douchebag mentality and understand and learn how to do business with people. That everybody ain't against you. Holding on to some old bullshit bitterness that I had years before, that's not really helping me right now. Every situation I get in, I'm supposed to rock that and flip it and use it to my advantage. The people in the corporate world or whatever, I'm sitting up thinking I'm doing something slick. These people are going to go on about their day with or without me. And even though I can do things on my own and do it without them, all business relationships can be beneficial. Work them to your advantage. And I had to learn that. That whole Rick James bullshit that I was on, it wasn't working for me. So I had to be man enough to admit, okay, I can't get down like that. So that's when I polished my game up. I knew how to make my game crisp and smile for the camera and work that and still have that street vibe and that street edge, but there's a tactfulness that I needed to have with it. Because shit, if you go back and listen to some of my old interviews or read some of my old interviews from around 2000 or 2001, there's a few of them that might be online somewhere. But if you listen or read an interview that I gave anywhere or magazine around 2000 or 2001, I sounded like a fucking madman. I was a completely different dude. And that type of mentality couldn't work for what I needed to be doing. So I had to admit that mistake. I couldn't keep making those mistakes because I was going to keep throwing salt in my own game. So this is why I'm saying this from experience. But the thing is, man, a lot of people don't understand that you get respect by admitting when you've done something wrong. People can respect that. People respect somebody who's honest enough to say when they're not doing something right. And especially with men and women. I'm not going to put it all on men, but men, we get kind of egotistical, just like the old joke about a man not wanting directions. The old joke about men who will drive in circles for hours and hours and hours lost because they don't want to ask nobody for direction. Like, oh, I know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. Because they feel like if they admit they don't know where they're going, they're going to look weak in front of their woman. That's what that whole thing is about. The man looking weak in front of his woman. The man feeling like he's not the leader. And the woman, if she's a down-ass female, if you got a down-ass chick, she can understand that every now and then you're going to make a few mistakes. If she's a down-ass chick. If you're dealing with a chick who's going to come at you greasy because you made an honest mistake, well, that's not the chick that you need to be messing with anyway. So men, we can get off that infallible persona that we try to have all the time. A woman can respect a dude. A real woman can respect a dude who's honest enough about what he can and cannot do. And the same for women, because women, you're just as bad. Women are just as bad, if not worse, because women are so-called technically the weaker sex. So a woman, many women feel like their personality has to be much stronger. They have to compensate for their physical so-called weakness, and they have to compensate by having an extremely strong, infallible personality. So a lot of women feel like they can't be wrong. This is why women will argue in illogical ways, because they don't want to come across as being wrong. They don't want to come across as being weak. They want to be seen as a person who can stand up, if not physically, at least verbally. That's why when you argue with women sometimes, fellas, and they get to talking about some of the most illogical shit, the woman has clearly made all types of mistakes and they just won't admit their mistakes. They'll argue in circles and they play verbal gymnastics. And they don't want to admit when they're wrong. When we do that, men and women, when we try to argue around our mistakes and pretend that we're not wrong, all that does is create resentment, people. That creates a lot of resentment. When you create that type of resentment, people end up hoping that you fail, just so you will learn a lesson. When you don't admit your mistakes, men and women, your significant other will look at you and they're like, oh, I hope something fucked up happens to him or her, so they will learn their damn lesson. So when you do make a major mistake that's extremely obvious that you can't explain away, your mate will relish in it. They will have a little victory dance about it, low key. And you don't want to have that kind of relationship where people are wishing bad things upon you because of your infallible personality that you're trying to project. When you're honest enough to say, hey man, I was supposed to get some at the grocery store the other day and I totally forgot. I was having a brain freeze that day. I was on some bullshit. Your mate can respect that. Men and women. We got to start learning how to be honest about what we can and what we cannot do and where we've gone wrong. We got to learn how to do that. And the thing is, in relationships, a lot of us are taught to fail in relationships. A lot of failed tactics are passed down from our parents. We have a lot of mothers out here they've had failed relationships. A lot of mothers out here who are being stanks. They don't want to admit that they were stanks. They don't want to admit that they got 5 kids by 5 different dudes because they were out here stanking up the game. So they'll pass that stanktivity down to their daughters, and your daughters are doing the same stank shit you were doing. This is why we see girls who have babies at 15, their kids grow up and have babies at 15, because the same lifestyle and the same mistakes are passed down. Just like dudes too. We have dudes, your dad, he's a simp. He was a a wimp getting ran over by women, he passes down his trick simp mentality to you. So a lot of our mistakes, they're passed down. So the thing is, we got to learn and acknowledge when we're making mistakes. We got to admit that we've made a mistake in the job that we've accepted. We have a career that we don't really like. We're doing something that we're not being fulfilled in. We have to admit that we made a mistake. We didn't follow our passion. It's a mistake to not follow your passion. It's a mistake to be complacent. We have to admit when we've taken on habits that's not beneficial to us. When you've become too much of a drinker, you're drinking too much, you hitting that pipe a little bit too much. You have to admit that you made a mistake. And you hitting that pipe to the point where you done lost your relationship. You hitting that pipe or you drinking that bottle to the point where you've lost jobs over it. But you still saying, oh no, they were tripping, I'm just having fun. You got to admit when you fucking up, man. We have to admit this stuff. We have to say, hey man, I got to put this pipe down. This shit has cost me my kids, my job, my livelihood, my driver's license. And most of all, we have to admit when we've chose the wrong significant other. We got to admit, like, hey, this ain't the chick for me. Ever since I've been fucking with this chick, my life has gone downhill. I've invested time and money and energy, but this is just not that bitch. Women too. You got to admit when you got with the wrong dude. Like, damn, I end up kicking it with this dude. I ain't doing shit. This nigga done fucked up my credit. This nigga got me smoking weed every day. This nigga done fucked my cousin. I made a mistake with this nigga. But hell, I'm here. So we gotta admit to our mistakes, people. And there's nothing wrong. We're human. You are human. Human beings make mistakes. There's no dishonor in that. There's only dishonor in not admitting your mistakes. That's been today's episode of the Mac Lessons Radio Show. My name is Tariq Elite. Today was a real mellow, Macish show, a very thought-provoking show, I hope.